Hello there and welcome to this very exciting video in which we are going to be looking at one of the key concepts used by the king of the blues himself, Mr. B.B. King. Now what I'm talking about here is the B.B. King box, or the B.B. box for short. A wonderful little collection of notes that King used a lot in his playing, which really helped to define his sound. And not just King, but really a lot of other players who are looking to sort of draw that connection between a slightly warmer, more upbeat major pentatonic sound and then that beautiful bluesy minor pentatonic sound that we all know and love. One of the key players that I'm talking about here who was heavily inspired by B.B. King was Peter Green. And if you're familiar with the Fleetwood Mac song Need Your Love So Bad, then you will have heard in that intro that I was really heavily borrowing from Green's ideas and playing over a backing track very, very similar to the sort of context he plays over in Need Your Love So Bad. Green's not the only player, of course, inspired by King, and in a more modern blues context, John Mayer is actually someone who relies on and uses this box shape, again, to kind of craft that warm, major, minor pentatonic sound in his playing. So, what are we going to be looking at in today's lesson? We're going to be looking at what the B.B. King box is, how it's constructed, looking a little bit, dipping our toes in the theory of the intervals and kind of what's going on there. We're going to look at which musical contexts you can play in and how you can use it. And I'm going to give you some sort of key examples of how you can implement the box in your playing and create a wide range of cool, interesting B.B. King style licks that'll just give that little magic touch to your improvisations. So let's get into it. Now, first things first, let's establish what the B.B. King box is. Now, like many of these box shapes and patterns in the blues, the B.B. box is nothing sort of new. It's not a different and exotic scale. It's just a collection of notes, in this case, taken from a mixture of notes from the minor pentatonic scale and the major pentatonic scale. So it's really a combination of that warmer, more upbeat major pentatonic sound and the sort of more melancholic, edgy, bluesy sound of the minor pentatonic scale. And that is what this box shape is all about, mixing those two worlds, mixing those two tonalities. Now we'll look at the intervals and talk through all of that side of things in a bit more detail in a moment. But first, let's establish what the box shape looks like. I played that opening example in the key of G, and all of the further examples in this lesson are going to be in the key of G. However, this is a movable box shape. So once you've got this box shape under your fingers, you can move it into A, into B, into C, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But first things first, let's look at the notes that are going on here. So, in the key of G, we're starting with our middle finger on the 9th fret of the G string. Then on the B string, 8, 10, and 11, all in a row. And you're going to play those with your first, your ring, and your little fingers. And then on the top string, you're going to play, in this case in the key of G, 8 and then 10 with the first and the third finger, or the ring finger. So when you put that together, you've got this. Now, I like to extend this box shape ever so slightly, and I'll explain why in a moment, by adding this note in here, the 7th fret on the G string, and this note up here, the 12th fret in this case, on the E string. So you would now have something like this. Those last two notes are not additional notes to the box. They are just merely repeating notes that we've already played, but in a different octave. So this note here on the 7th fret, the first additional note, is the exact same note and interval as the 10th fret on the high E string. And this final note that I played up here, the 12th fret on the E string, is simply an octave higher. Is actually the same note as the starting note of the 9th fret. Again, it's just an octave higher. Targeting those notes takes us out of the box shape a little bit, so it's not quite so compact, but when we start to think and visualize about those notes, gives you many more options because you can slide in, you can sort of target those notes in different ways. But again, one little quick recap of the box shape without those two notes is as follows. So, quick little look intervallically at what's happening here so we can understand, that mixture of major and minor and which notes are bringing that little bit of flavor of each scale into the BB box. So to begin with, this first note here is the major sixth. As the name suggests, that's a major interval taken from the major pentatonic scale. Now next up, played with that first finger on the B string, is the tonic note. In this case, it's the tonic note of G. Next up, we have another major, this note here, which is a major second. Again, that's an interval from the major pentatonic scale, and it's bringing us a warm major sound. Right next to it, one of the key intervals from the minor pentatonic scale, the flat third, the minor third interval here. And that really brings a lot of tension and adds a lot of tension into the box. And then finally, on this top string, we have here the perfect fourth interval, which appears in the minor pentatonic scale, but not the major pentatonic scale. And then lastly, up here, the perfect fifth interval, up here at the 10th fret, which appears in both the major pentatonic scale and the minor pentatonic scale. So, running through those intervals gives us this very clear idea. Even if you're not, super sharp on the theory, you're not really clear on what intervals are, it gives us that clear idea of some of the notes here are from the major pentatonic scale, some of the notes are from the minor pentatonic scale. Now, there are a couple of implications of this. Number one is, when you are soloing and using this, you want to be doing it in a major blues context. So you want to be doing it over dominant seventh chords and over those major blues progressions. If not, you are going to get a clash between some of those major intervals, and while some of them do work, it's going to make navigating and soloing and using the box a lot more difficult. It's also not really the way that B.B. King used the box. He typically used it over those sort of major blues progressions as well. So that's a really important first point. Beyond that, we can get into the fun stuff of actually practically mixing the two scales. The joy of this box is that you have those two tonalities right next to each other. And so you can move between them and sort of move between warm and upbeat and then sort of a little more aggressive and melancholy in a very dynamic and quick, smooth way through bending, sliding, grace notes, all of that good stuff. So let's have a little look at how we might make that happen. This first note here down on the G string is really a bit more of a launching in note. You can bend that, but because we're talking and we're thinking about being in this box shape, you really want to put your hand there into that position where you can hit all of the other notes easily. And so it makes sense to lead here with your middle finger and then jump into the box shape with your first and your third fingers. So that's a bit of a launching in note. As I mentioned, you can think about sliding or moving from that additional sort of bonus note, which makes a really, really nice start for licks. So going in sort of things like this. It's a really nice way of getting into the box. When we get here, onto that B string, we've got 3 different notes on this string. Now, the first note is the tonic note. That is your home base. It's your kind of musical happy place. It's where you hit those strong points of resolution. And so you probably don't want to be messing around with this note for most of the time. It's a place where you finish your phrases, you resolve on that first finger, and you just add a little beautiful bit of vibrato in that B.B. King style. Really sweet little vibrato style. Now, when we get further up the B string, the exciting stuff happens because here, there's a few different things going on. When we get to that 10th fret, the major second, we have a few options. We can bend it a whole tone. And what we're doing there is we're pushing the pitch of that note 2 frets up to here. which will be the major third interval. And that is a key interval in the major pentatonic scale, which defines its tonality. The third is always super important. If it's a flat third, it's telling you that it's a minor scale. The scale has a minor tonality. And if it's a major third, it's telling you that it has a major tonality. So if you push that up a whole tone, you're going from a major sound into a major sound. You're sticking major the whole way through. Conversely, and of course, you can slide up into that. Hammer on. And do all sorts of combinations, and we'll get to that in a little bit later on. The other cool option that you have here is to bend or slide or whatever it might be, a semitone or a half step up here. So in that way, you're moving from the major second into the flat third. So you're moving from a major sound into a minor sound. And I did that quite a number of times in that opening solo. And it gives you that very beautiful melancholic blues sound, because it kind of starts off happy and then it gets a little sad. And it's just got a beautiful sort of flowing, lilting sound to it. And of course, you can do the same thing with slides, hammer-ons, and combining all that good stuff together. Now, if we go up to that 11th fret on the B string, we're starting on the flat third, on the minor third interval. Now again, here's a couple of different options. If you push that a full tone up, then you're going from the flat third to the perfect fourth, both of which are notes from the minor pentatonic scale. So you're going from minor, you're sticking minor. But as you saw before, there's this major third interval. So at the 12th fret. So you also have the option, if you want, of just pushing it up a semitone or a half step from the minor third to the major third like this. Now that is a super classic sort of blues move. Appears all the time, going from the flat third to the major third. It really is that sort of very classic blues sound. So that's a really, really nice option here as well. Now, when we get to the top string, the E string, that fourth, you can move from that fourth nicely into the fifth. Now, you could do that bending. So you could get a little bit of oomph on that note and push it a sort of whole tone up from the fourth to the fifth. But that's not really a very B.B. King style thing, in my opinion. That's got more of the intensity and aggression of the Albert King box, on which I've already done a sort of full deep dive, and I've linked that below. So do go and check that out if you're interested in learning about that. But that's got a more aggressive vibe. With B.B. King, we're all about sweetness and subtlety, and I'll talk more about that later. So for me, I wouldn't go for that. Instead, I would just think about sort of having that as a note that you play as part of sort of shapes. But I wouldn't necessarily be targeting it through bends. You can, of course, however, though, do hammer-ons, pull-offs, slides between those two notes there. And that works really, really nicely. And then when we get onto that final note of the box, the 10th fret in this key of G, the best option, in my opinion, there is one of two things. Is to bend a whole tone or a sort of whole step up to the 12th fret like this. Or slide hammer on between those two notes. So what you're doing there is you're moving from a shared note from the fifth, which appears in both the major and the minor pentatonic scales, and then you're moving into the major sixth. So you're moving from that sort of shared note into the major sound. Really, really beautiful, very sweet, just works, an absolute treat. And that is kind of the fundamentals of the box and how I would think about sort of playing it. So now we've sort of run through the kind of nuts and bolts of what's going on there. Let's look at practically how we can actually bring this to life with some ideas that you can implement in your solo. The key of the game here is all about making that mix as fluid and sort of smooth as possible. So there's a few little implications of that. It's really about, number one, deciding how major you want to go or how minor you want to go. The major is the warmth, the minor is the kind of bluesy feel. So it's about deciding that balancing act for you. And then it just comes down to actually implementing that practically. And here there are sort of three little ideas that we can talk through to get the ball rolling and sort of get you using this in your own solos. So the first idea is really sticking here in that BB King box. So we've talked about this little shape, but what's happening here is we're actually sort of straddling between a shape of the major pentatonic scale and a shape of the minor pentatonic scale. So in the key of G, the major pentatonic scale that is appearing here that we're kind of using or dipping into is as follows. Now, it can be difficult to sort of visualize that just on the fretboard. So in the full lesson for this video inside the Blues Club, you'll find the tabs for all these musical examples. You'll find the backing track for the intro solo as well as the tabs for that solo. And you'll find scale diagrams showing these crossovers. So if you want to dive really deep into this content, hit that link below to access all of those great resources. But now we can turn our attention to sort of the top strings where we've been looking at the BB King box and think about how to move between that BB box and the third shape of the minor pentatonic scale. So this way it's a little bit easier to visualize and we can create some really, really cool sounds. So what can we do here? Well, let's say we start with ideas based in the BB King box like this. We're sort of starting there, and then suddenly all we need to do is think about switching our focus to this third pentatonic shape. And we create a much sort of bluesier, more melancholic sound. So when you sort of put those together and mix them, you can get little lines like this. Now that time I was really more on the minor pentatonic side of the spectrum, but you can sort of decide where on that spectrum you want to fall. It can be much warmer, more major, more upbeat style, or you can sort of drop in a little bit more heavily on that minor pentatonic box and you'll end up with something a little bit more like what I had there. So that's the first little trick, sort of mix in that particular position between those two shapes and you can create some very, very cool lines. Just awesome. Now, tips number 2 and 3, or the sort of, the second and third ways that we can sort of think about using this BB King box, rely on a similar sort of idea. And it's again all about mixing with the major or the minor and deciding where on that spectrum of darkness to lightness you want to be. So, in my experience, a lot of players, especially when they're getting started with this material, they like to use the BB King box and then they like to drop back into the first shape of the minor major pentatonic scale. So kind of that more familiar position. So in that way, they dip out, create those King of the Blues lines, and then drop back into somewhere where they feel a little bit more confident. And it works just an absolute treat. So here you have two options. You can start in that BB King box, and then you drop back into the major scale, major pentatonic scale, or you can do the opposite. So let's talk as point number 2 through that first one, going BB King box to major. And now that's exactly what I did in my opening solo. So let's take another sort of look at that. Something like this could work really, really well. So there, I'm playing in that BB King box. I was actually targeting more of the major sounds in that box and then dropping down into that first position or second position, depending on how you think of it, of the major pentatonic scale. So there you get a very major, warm sound. That was the sound I favored for the opening solo in that sort of Need Your Love So Bad vibe, because I really feel that's like a warm, relaxed kind of blues context. Now we can take the opposite approach where we start with that BB King box, but then drop into something altogether a bit more minor. So here we'd be moving from the BB King box into the first shape of the minor pentatonic scale. So playing and sort of executing lines like this. So the ending there, I took a little bit, sort of out of the scale, but essentially when I drop back down there, it's creating a much, much sort of darker, bluesier sound. And that was because I was using the first shape of the G minor pentatonic scale. So in that way, you have two very different frameworks that you can use to create two very different feels in the solos. And that, of course, was just targeting one shape of either the major or the minor pentatonic scale. You could have done that in any position on the fretboard. I just chose to show it there because often players feel comfortable when they're sort of getting going, and it gives them a real nice foothold into this material. Now, I've just remembered a little bonus tip that you can use again to mix this major and minor sound and actually mix the sort of the blues boxes of choice for two of the greatest blues guitar players of all time, B.B. King and Albert King. Now, I've got a full video on the Albert King box, so hit that if you don't know what this is all about and you don't know how to play the Albert King box. Because what we're going to do here is mix the two box shapes, because the Albert King box sits directly below the BB King box by 2 frets on the fretboard. It is just a collection of 5 notes from the second shape of the minor pentatonic scale. So in this way, you can create some very cool major sounding lines and mixing in with a little of that minor in the BB box, then move into the Albert King box, and then you're very well placed, or you've sort of bridged your way back to that familiar first playing position. So let's have a look at this in action. We start in the BB King box. Then shift down to the Albert King box. And then you're right there to move back into that first position and then either go major or minor. Or so you can create these very, very cool lines which sort of give a bit of that BB King flavor, a bit of that Albert King flavor, and then help you navigate from this position on the fretboard up to here, or between those shapes, whichever way you kind of look at it. But it's a very, very nice framework to use. And of course, you can go the other way as well. So you can start in the Albert King box, slide up in a little musical way like that, and create that very smooth musical lines that move between the two. So a nice little bonus one there for you to try. And again, the diagrams and some little example licks of all of this are included in the full lesson in the link below. Now, my final big piece of advice when you're getting started on this BB King box is think about the style of the master. The BB King style of playing is very sparse. It's about feel. It's about emotion. It's about locking in with the track and really just playing those notes when they need to be played. One of my all-time favorite guitar quotes is from B.B. King, and it says, "Notes are expensive, spend them wisely." It's a wonderful thing to think about when you're playing in this box, and it's really the way that I tried to approach that opening solo. Again, I was borrowing heavily from Peter Green, and really that's what he was doing in Need Your Love So Bad. Really allowing the notes to breathe, keeping things very open and airy, not packing too much in. In the Albert King box, you can be a little fast and ferocious. You can create those fast lines. And that intensity is all kind of, part of what brings the magic of that sound to life. Here, restraint, vibrato, timing, phrasing, that's what it's all about. That soft touch, the dynamics of your playing. So don't get lost in how many different licks can I create and how quickly can I do all that sort of stuff. The focus should be on how can I improve the quality of my bending? How can I get that vibrato really bringing those notes to life? How can I improve and tighten up my timing? If you're watching the full lesson for this inside the Blues Club, then practice this box over that G-style backing track and really play in that restrained style, leaving space, letting the notes bloom. And once you've built that confidence, then move this into other keys. Try it in A, B, C. It is a beautiful idea to shift around the neck, and it will give you that wonderful King of the Blues sound in any key in which you might be playing. Just remember to keep it in those major blues keys to avoid some of those harsh clashes. Now that is it for the B.B. King box. It is a brilliant little bundle of notes to include in your playing and a great way to get started understanding and actually practically mixing the major and minor pentatonic sounds in your playing. And of course, one important thing to mention here is that a big part of getting to grips with the B.B. King box is testing out how you navigate across it. So not just falling into the same old patterns of movement or the sort of patterns that I'm illustrating here, but really trying to move across it in different ways. Try different note groupings, try little different ways of putting, moving from one string to the next, skip across strings, see what works for you and really push the boundaries and experiment and test until you start to kind of build up a little series of licks and ideas that work really, really well for you. So good luck and give this a go. And if you've got any questions or comments about anything I've covered in this video, just pop them in the comments below and I'm always around and happy to help. And as I said before, if you want to dive a little deeper into this, you want to access the tab and the backing track for that initial solo, you want to get tabs for all the example licks that I've been using throughout, and you want to get an additional 5 bonus licks that you can use to get up and running in the B.B. King box, hit the link below to head into the Blues Club and get the full lesson. Access all of those resources as well as a whole range of other courses, resources, and one-to-one personalized support. Good luck, guys, and I'll see you over there.